Hello there, I'm Shane Jacobs, working for OSRL Response, and I'm a duty manager and team supervisor based in our office in Southampton in the UK. Today I'm going to be speaking about an incident we responded to in July 2018, which was the SSL Kolkata in India. On the 13th of June 2018, a fire erupted on board the SSL Kolkata. The SSL Kolkata is a 150-metre general cargo vessel that was built in 2006. The fire erupted on board and spread around approximately 70% of the ship's cargo deck, where the vessel master quickly ordered abandon ship. All 22 crew members were subsequently rescued by the Indian Coast Guard, with the vessel remaining with 464 containers on board and 350 cubes of heavy fuel oil. The SSL Kolkata was then left drifting at sea after the crew were recovered by the Indian Coast Guard. The SSL Kolkata ran aground approximately 7.5 nautical miles off the Indian Sundarbans. The Sundarbans consists of a complex network of tidal waterways, mudflats and small islands of salt-tolerant mangrove forest. The forest is nationally and internationally considered to be of critical conservation significance for its environmental services and biodiversity. During high tides, the area is partly flooded and saltwater mixes with freshwater river basins. The mangrove consists of over 334 species of plants, but are dominated by only a few species. On the 22nd of June, the International Tanker Owners Pollution Federation, ITOF, were mobilised to support the SSL Kolkata incident. ITOF subsequently mobilised OSRL on the 4th of July under the RESPONSECON contract. OSRL's first mobilisation under this new contract. RESPONSECON proved to be a smooth and efficient mobilisation for shipping incidents in comparison to our previous third-party agreements to support vessels and salvage operations. OSRL would mobilise 5 personnel, a current buster, 2 and an aerostat, complete with a recovery device and boom vane. The current buster was selected for containment due to the perceived lack of available response vessels in the location and the shallow water depths. Upon mobilisation by the client, OSRL staff sought visas to travel to India. These were sought by the 8th of July when the first team arrived in country. 1 person from the 5-man team stayed behind to complete training on the aerostats requested by the client. On arrival in country, the in-country team began planning for offshore operations. This started with identifying vessels of opportunity, a procedure implemented by the offshore core group, part of the OSRL subject matter expert program. The VU procedure enables OSRL to review the safety and suitability of proposed vessels and developing vessel loading plans. In total, 19 vessels were assessed for their suitability, with only 8 being approved by OSRL for use. OSRL completed a similar process to the vessel of opportunity with our aerial assets. This is namely the aircraft of opportunity procedure. This was completed for the Indian Coast Guard aircraft, which again was approved for use. OSRL staff also continued to plan for dispersant operations and also looked into the feasibility of using an Indian Navy TC-free aerial application system. In the early phases of planning, there was also a requirement to look at the logistics and the procurement of helium in country to support the deployment and use of an aerostat for an extended period of time. A helium burn plan and logistics plan for the offshore supply and resupply of the helium was also produced. It was quickly noted when the team arrived in country that the salvage operators were not using a form of incident management, whether that was going to be ICS or IMS system. OSRL suggested implementing a suitable IMS structure to promote effective communication and management of the incident between the multidisciplinaries of salvage and spill response. This also enabled OSRL and the salvage to deconflict response roles and responsibilities amongst the various organisations. This approach enhanced the response and supported effective communication across the entire operation, response planning and offshore logistics. Whilst the in-country team continued to plan for offshore operations, OSRL Southampton continued their efforts to clear the equipment in country. The equipment eventually was cleared a few days later on the 12th of July, where the equipment was then deployed to a laydown area supplied by the salver. The equipment was then commissioned for use offshore. This included the deployment and testing of the aerostat, an asset that was not owned by OSRL, where training was then delivered. On completion of the commissioning and the checking of the equipment was then transported down to Namkhana for loading onto a response vessel. At this time of year, it was monsoon season in the Sundarbans. This caused inclement weather for a long period of time during the response, which hampered the response efforts and also hampered the lightering efforts by the salvers. Eventually, the weather cleared, which enabled salvage operations to continue. It was then decided to deploy the aerostat and trial it on scene to see if it could further support offshore operations. Whilst this proved effective on scene, the lack of internet connectivity limited the data being able to be streamed to the command centre located in Kolkata. It would be worth noting at this point that although OSRL were in country ready to respond to an incident, there was no oil sighted from the vessel. Throughout the response, OSRL were trying to board an Indian Coast Guard flight to carry out some aerial observations of the area and look at the potential impact locations for effective response planning. On the 14th of August, the OSRL were invited to attend a flight with the Indian Coast Guard and ITOF to observe the vessel and the surrounding area. During this time, the vessel was continuing to be lighted by the salver and no oil was observed during the overflight. OSRL then completed one further overflight during this time. Again, no oil was observed. Subsequently, on the 18th of September, with the vessel now lighted with heavy fuel oil, OSRL were demobilised from the incident. Throughout this response, OSRL faced several challenges. For instance, in the first example, the image at the top left of the screen shows an image of the sea conditions and the sea state that were faced by the salvers and potentially for OSRL in the response. With it being monsoon season, the sea state and wind was sporadic and often led to downtime periods where no operations could commence due to these conditions. In the centre image at the top, there is an image of the bathymetric survey. Bathymetric surveys were completed to understand the water depths around the vessel and the surrounding area. As it was discovered, water depths were very low, and at times it would have been very difficult for a containment operation to continue due to these depths. An incident command structure was not implemented in the early phases of the response and the salvage operation. However, once implemented, it proved that this was very effective in enhancing the response, something that OSRL would advise any response team and inherit at an earlier stage. In the lower left, the image appears to show oil sighted at sea. Throughout the operation, OSRL were trying to get on board an aircraft to complete aerial surveillance operations to help support the salvers and also to aid a response and the response planning. Eventually, when we did get on one of the overflights, some oil appeared to be observed offshore. However, we could not ascertain whether this oil came from the SSL Kolkata or was from a previous spill in the area. The lower right image shows an image of the mangroves and also in the inset a picture of the Bengal tiger. One of the key issues for the spill site was access, particularly the fact there was no road access. One of the key challenges of this response effort was logistics. To get to the location offshore, there was no road access, so we had to use a port in Namkhana. This entailed loading several vessels and then several vessel-to-vessel transfers of equipment and personnel to get to the spill location. Throughout the response, we maintained at least 2 responders offshore at any one time. This was to enable us to respond effectively and immediately. However, we would then need to backfill these people. We would then need to have complemented these people with additional responders from the UK and Singapore bases. This particular challenge was reflective across the salvage operation and in aid of a response, where the limited amount of vessels on scene also hampered the amount of times we could transfer equipment to and from the location. And as I previously mentioned, the weather conditions also prevented some of these transfers taking place. In any response, OSRL learns lessons from these response activities. Particularly in this, we learned a lot about logistics and the importance of the logistics processes we follow. We also managed to enhance some of our procedures around the shipping of dangerous goods. We also drove home the message about the importance of an incident management structure and how effective that supports an incident. We also learned with the use of the new response contract, how easy it is for us and salvers to mobilise OSRL under this contract. In total, OSRL spent a total of 229 man days responding to this incident. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch.